Buckeyes Now on Sports Illustrated. I'm Brendan Gulick along with Brett Hiltbrand. Today was a big day in Columbus, a day that frankly may have been even more important than it usually is. It was pro day today for the Ohio State Buckeyes, where 14 of the recent Buckeyes, and actually even a couple of the former Buckeyes from years prior to this past fall, had a chance to work out for what ended up being 31 of the 32 NFL franchises. No scouting combine officially in Indianapolis this year because of the pandemic, so it puts these individual school pro days under a little bit more of a microscope. And, of course, Justin Fields, as certainly what feels like a surefire first-round pick, was the star of the show. Brett, why don't we start with Justin? Can we please stop this nonsense about Fields having a fourth-round draft grade or some of this other insane stuff you read online? I mean, his pro day today was ridiculous. Made some crazy good deep ball throws. Looked every bit the part of one of the premier players in this draft.
4.44 40 time.
Oh yeah, that well. Too.
Nothing to and looks like an absolute unit out there. He's anything other than first round is just absurd. And if I would question the tape and evaluating credentials of anyone who thinks that, regardless of whether or not you think he's like first round good, the fact that you just don't know how the NFL works that's a problem. But that being said, he did everything he needed to do to really warrant, I think, everything that a lot of people are expecting of him at the next level, right? And so I thought the deep ball timing was especially good. Most of the time, I know that scouts are looking for velocity and accuracy in those drills, and just kind of how effortless or how difficult it might be for a guy. It's less about maybe the end result and more about kind of what happens, as he's throwing mechanically, fundamentally. But I think he did everything he absolutely needed to do. And it's right now, I think in some ways he's in the conversation for first overall, given the draft order and also who is drafting. I think it's a conversation we have to have.
I think it's worth having. I'd be really surprised if Trevor Lawrence is not the number one overall pick.
Sure.
But I think Justin Fields is absolutely the elite level player that should be considered among the first few picks in the draft. The idea that it's a lock that Zach Wilson's going to become a New York Jet, I don't know if I'm buying that as much as I think some of the national media folks have been shoving that narrative to us. Certainly with San Francisco trading up to 3, I think people are making way too big of a deal about San Francisco's, true brass being in Tuscaloosa today to watch Mac Jones. They're going to do their homework. They're going to get a chance to see Justin Fields throw if they want to see him throw. I'm really not overly worried about that. Fields came out today and said, if I have to throw again to prove it to someone who didn't see it, I want to show people what I do on an everyday basis and not that I can just ramp up for one specific day. So, I mean, look, I thought today was an A+ home run for him. He said the right things. He did the right things. His tape has been incredible. His toughness, I think, is really probably his best overall attribute. Fine. He's fast. He's big. He's physical. He can throw it, through a wall, right? He's got a rocket arm, but man, his toughness in the 2 years that he played for Ohio State stand out to me more than anything else. You think back to some of his signature plays, they happened to come after he had gotten, lit up pretty good recently before that. Certainly the Michigan game comes to mind. Yeah. The Skalski hit in the Sugar Bowl this year comes to mind. I don't know what else an NFL team wants to see from a quarterback. He's launching it all over the field. Looks good doing it.
And I'm glad you brought up the toughness too, because I think that is very much something that heavily influences some of these teams' decision to whether or not they're going to take Justin Fields, because I think if you look at the mobility now that is required of NFL quarterbacks outside of like a handful of guys, and then a handful of very specific offenses. You need to be mobile, and with mobility in the NFL comes getting just taking shots and getting hit. And I think teams, obviously, Lamar Jackson is certainly the guy that everyone looks to when it comes to quarterback mobility. Kyler Murray, obviously, the other one probably, and
I think Wilson too.
Yeah, for sure. And Russ, I think Russ is probably the most accurate comp to Justin Fields that we have right now in the NFL, just because I think his arm talent is, at least the ceiling on it, is equal to Russ, as opposed to, say, the arm talent of a Kyler Murray or Lamar Jackson. Both of whom are getting better as we've seen, in the last season. That potential to be really good in the pocket is also dangerous. And quite frankly, if you're a Browns fan, it's terrifying considering the AFC North and what's out there at quarterback with Joe Burrow. And then, if Lamar Jackson develops into a legit pocket passer, that's going to be a problem. But I think the toughness is a huge factor in the evaluation of Justin Fields, because if he is able to showcase, and there obviously is a ton of this on tape, if he's able to showcase the durability, I think that makes him actually more marketable and makes him more, certainly makes him look better, I think, to a handful of teams as well. So there's no way he's falling out of the first round. There's a 0% chance that happens. And I think the toughness is a big factor for that, and that's huge for him, because I think he, given some of how he was banged up towards the end of the year, right? He had to come into this pro day looking like he put all of that behind him and recovered a good bit. I absolutely did that. Job done.
Justin Fields wasn't the only guy to work out today, although he certainly, I think, was the runaway headliner. There's a lot of different ways we can take this conversation. And I think we should talk about Tommy Togiai and Baron Browning and Wyatt Davis and Josh Myers, his lack of really having a chance today. But I think the biggest surprise of the day for me, maybe shame on me for not knowing this or not thinking this, the competition, if you will, on the bench press. Justin Hilliard put up more reps on the bench than Wyatt Davis did. How about Justin Hilliard? 27 reps, absolutely shined today. I really think Justin Hilliard, for being a guy that's been in Columbus for 6 years, I think he's trying to prove to NFL teams that, hey, these upper body injuries that bothered me and extended my college career, they're not knee injuries. They're not Achilles injuries. They're not ones that are necessarily going to limit his NFL potential. He's extremely mature. He's a really hard worker. He's the perfect locker room guy. I think Justin Hilliard did himself a big favor today.
He absolutely did, and he had to, because if you think about it, compared to if we're just comparing to the other Ohio State linebackers who are in this pro day and obviously draft eligible, he doesn't have near the amount of tape that those guys do as well. So he has to show a little bit more. And the bench press is certainly a big reason why, or a big thing to do that, and a big reason why it's it makes him certainly look a lot better to NFL scouts in teams. The entire linebacking core that's going into the draft this year is so intriguing, is probably the best word to describe how I feel about it, because there's a lot of really high ceiling for potential here with this group, and I'm genuinely fascinated to see how they both fit into teams in the NFL, or even if they make them. I think there are a couple of guys that you're certainly wondering if they're even going to make teams. I think it's going to be super, super interesting to see how that shakes out. Baron Browning is a great example today, who we obviously know all the physical gifts that he has. We've known it since he was 16. And I think given all the hype that he had coming into Ohio State, everyone expected him to be the next great Ohio State linebacker. That didn't really happen in his Ohio State career. He was still absolutely solid as far as, getting a ton of playing time and having a ton of tape and being pretty darn successful and playing in some big games, and then comes out and runs the fastest 40 time that I think we're going to see from a linebacker this year, barring maybe a handful, maybe two other guys. I think he is of all the linebackers for me, including Justin Hilliard. I think Baron Browning is by far the guy that is NFL scouts are looking at going, like, do we roll the dice on this guy? Because I think the upside for him is just sky high.
Well, you mentioned the AFC North earlier. Again, as a Browns fan, sort of off topic, Baron Browning has Pittsburgh Steelers or Baltimore Ravens written all over him. That's what it screams to me.
Yeah, 6-time Pro Bowler, like lifer for the Ravens. Yeah. Just terrorizing running backs in coverage like over the next 10 years. You're exactly right. Let's not speak that into existence though.
I think he's got a really, really bright future in the NFL. And the other guy that really performed well specifically, we didn't mention much about him here, but Pete Werner, really, really solid day today. Werner, let's see, checked in 6'2" and 7/8 inches, 238 pounds. He only did 20 reps on the bench press, but had a very good time of 6.95 on the 3-cone drill. Shuttle time 4.38, pretty solid. A 10-2 broad jump, nothing wrong with that. Nearly 40 inches, 39.5 on the vertical jump. Those are pretty good numbers from a linebacker like Pete Werner that I think is probably going to be projected to be a day 2 pick.
Yeah, I had some Ohio State people. Round. Yeah, I had some Ohio State people tell me that Pete Werner might be the most physically gifted guy on the Ohio State football team last year, and that's saying something if you think about it. The vertical was, I think, almost 40, which for a linebacker is exceptional.
Yep.
But I think the thing that Pete showed me a lot was he played a couple different. He played all 3 linebacker spots in his time at Ohio State. At different points. He also played under 2 different coordinators, 2 of which ran entirely different schemes, especially when it comes to assignments and gap contain. I think Pete Werner can do it all. Same thing with Tuff Borland. I think Tuff is going to be fascinating too, because you wonder about the speed and certainly the east-west speed as well. But I think the intangibles there are through the roof, and watching all of these Ohio State linebackers, where they end up, when that first game is played, it's going to be fascinating to watch. Legit fascinating.
Let's talk Trey Sermon for a minute. Trey also, I thought, performed pretty well today. He said in his, I don't want to call it a post-game press conference, but post-workout press conference, that he was happy but not satisfied is how he described it. He said he thought he could have performed better, but still thought he did a good enough job and put himself in a good place. His 40 time today, pretty darn solid, 4.57 in his second run. Look, I think Trey Sermon, Buckeye Nation didn't get an extended look at him. But another guy that, it seems to be pretty mature, pretty locked in with the groove of understanding the game, committing to, deepening his knowledge of the game. I think Trey Sermon's got a chance to be a pretty good pro. What that means for his draft status should be interesting, because running backs typically don't get drafted particularly high anymore. But I think he's got a very solid chance to have a good career.
I agree. I think he's the type of guy that will help NFL teams, and it's one of those dudes that will be able to play a couple different roles, specifically at running back. I think he's underrated as a pass catcher. We didn't see a ton of that at his time at Ohio State, but we did see him catch some balls today. Today being Tuesday when we're taping this. I think the running back is, I think, at the NFL level is one of the harder things to evaluate, for guys that aren't like otherworldly, like tier one running backs. Then like the next group down is so difficult because you wonder how much about, in the same way that we talk about like quarterbacks, how much fit matters. Former Ohio State running back Antonio Pittman and I are pretty close, and talking about, with him in the past about some of the assignments that he would was required to know when he was at the New Orleans Saints was absolutely insane. Some of the pre-snap stuff that he had to know, and then Drew Brees would go up there, he'd call 3 plays in the huddle, and then he'd give you like a attaboy or like a wrist flick, and that was what it just was crazy. And so like fit really matters. And I think for the guy like Trey, who obviously has a ton of really outstanding tape, even in his time at Oklahoma, and then obviously towards the end of the year at Ohio State, but also had to master 2 different systems. So obviously like super high football IQ. I think that bodes well because he's able to probably fit in just about any possible, offensive setup that NFL teams have. So I think he's got a great shot. Absolutely agree.
Yeah, I mean, hey, look, a guy goes out and continues his education and gets a graduate, as a graduate transfer to leave one school, go to the next, and work toward a graduate degree. I mean, that should tell you something about a young man's mentality beyond football, right? So
right.
Even just on that level, I think it's impressive too. I like Trey's chances a lot. I thought he did well for himself today.
Yeah, and like how awesome is it too? Like, and this is one of the great things about the grad transfer rule, right? Is that Trey Sermon could have gone to the NFL out of OU, out of Oklahoma, no problem. Like, absolutely collecting checks on Sundays, and yet wanted another year of football, to potentially go out and win, but also help his status, right? And he absolutely did that. That's huge. Credit to him.
Well, and even beyond that, he doesn't have a lot of miles on him, right? I mean, he didn't have a chance to play even a full season for Ohio State. And over the course of his, time at Oklahoma, he split carries. So for a guy that's got a lot of experience, he doesn't have a ton of mileage on him. And I think there's something that should attract scouts to that as well. And obviously, with the exception of the extremely disappointing note of the national championship game and getting hurt on the first play from scrimmage, what he did over a couple game stretch leading up to that was ridiculous. I mean, it was historic. So, Trey will definitely be remembered for that in Columbus for sure. Other guys that worked out today, I mentioned there were a couple of other guys that obviously were not on this team last year. Johnny Dixon caught some passes from Justin Fields. Robert Landers worked out, former defensive tackle, and Dante Booker went through some linebacker drills. So they were active today as well. I think the last thing I want to touch on here is Tommy Togiai. I haven't really talked about him yet, and the fact that he went for the combine record. I guess it's still technically the combine record, even though it's a pro day. Was hoping he could break the record of 49 bench presses with 225 pounds. He was trying to go for 50. He ended up only getting 40. Like only 40 is some kind of weird consolation prize.
I was laughing when you said that.
It's still ridiculous. Showed off his strength, but he actually talked to the media afterward about the fact that he was not just proud of what he did there, but frankly of what he did from a speed standpoint and an agility standpoint, because he was trying to showcase himself as a guy that's not just some brute strength on the interior of the defensive line, but hey, I can actually move around a little bit too. His 40 time was sub 5 seconds. You get a guy that is that strong that can run a sub 5 second 40 time from the interior of the defensive line. That shows me something for sure. His shuttle was 449. His 3-cone a little slower, 720. Yeah. But not too bad. All things considered, I think Togiai had a pretty good day.
Yeah, and I'm not so sure how much 3-cone matters for interior D-line guys either. So I think that's like an inside football bit that I'm not entirely familiar with, because in case you've noticed, I never played defensive lineman ever. And I'm sure everyone watching is blown away by that. But he is so interesting as an NFL guy because of all the guys that we've talked about so far, maybe save for Justin Fields. I think a legit, always solid interior D lineman, like that guy can get like 2 big contracts, play for like 12 to 15 years in the NFL and make an absolute boatload of money. Like that's absolutely his ceiling for sure. It is that type of guy. And I think some of the stuff that we saw him do at Ohio State, in both run defense and also rushing the passer, that like ability to be that dynamic in both phases was really special at times. And I think I have a feeling, and this is bordering on hot take territory. I have a feeling that we're going to watch Tommy Togiai do some special things in the NFL, and then we're going to look back on his time at Ohio State and go, he was so much better than we thought he was when he was with the Scarlet and Gray. We're going to look back on that time and go, man, he was so good, and maybe we didn't pay as much of attention to him as we should have.
As we wrap up here, there were a couple of other guys I think we just need to at least make mention here.
Josh Myers, for sure.
Josh Myers was there. I'm sure he probably had some side conversations with some of the NFL folks. I think there were roughly 75 NFL personnel there, 12 GMs, 4 head coaches, and the rest of them were scouts and front office folks. Josh Myers basically did a weigh-in, and they checked his hand size. But he told us afterward that he is 2 months out of the roughly 4 anticipated in his recovery process from an injury that he kept pretty quiet during the season. He suffered a turf toe injury during the year, and it got worse in the Big Ten championship game and actually got to the point where his foot, in his words, got pretty messed up and it required surgery. If you want to check out the press conference and hear the exact story from Josh there, I'm sure you can check that out on our YouTube channel. But Myers is still on the road to recovery there. Jonathan Cooper worked out a little bit with the linebackers today, and I thought held his own. Although he mostly went through drills as a defensive end, he did a little bit of work with the linebackers. That could be something interesting to keep your eye on if we see Cooper try to maybe make a jump to a 4 linebacker set defensively at the next level. We'll see if he fits in a 3-4. And obviously Sean Wade, who we've talked a lot about throughout the course of the year. Sean did not work out today. He'll do that on April 14th. He is also still recovering from an injury. So those are a couple of other little side notes there as the Buckeyes put a wrap on Pro Day. And so now all the attention turns to the next couple of weeks here of training and spring ball continuing, and then the NFL draft coming up here and now officially 1 month. We'll have plenty more coverage talking about spring practices with the spring game coming up on Saturday, April 17th. And of course, the draft opens up in Cleveland on, I guess it'll be Thursday night, April the 29th. We'll see if there are multiple Buckeyes selected in the first round this year or not. Lots to be determined. But in the meantime, for Brett Hiltbrand, I'm Brendan Gulick. We'll see you again real soon. Ohio State wraps up its pro day here on March 30th and had 14 guys that were invited to the combine this year. I thought largely all did pretty well. Stick around, BuckeyesNow.com for all the latest on Ohio State as we continue to cover through spring practice.